Cleaning lady is unfairly fired, but her son discovers the boss's secret. Margaret Johnson had dedicated the best 15 years of her life to that mansion, waking before sunrise to take 3 buses to the upscale neighborhood of New York. She never imagined that one day she would be thrown out like an intruder, carrying only her empty cleaning bag and a broken heart. On that Tuesday morning, her son Ethan was with her because school had been suspended due to a plumbing problem. The 10-year-old boy held his mother's hand tightly when Dr. Richard Peterson appeared at the main gate, gesturing nervously and shouting words the boy would never forget. "Your services are no longer needed here," yelled the man, his face red with anger. "Grab your things and leave immediately." Margaret stood frozen, not understanding what was happening. For 15 years, she had cared for that house as if it were her own family. She knew every corner, every piece of furniture, every stain that needed special attention. She had watched the boss's children grow up, had comforted Mrs. Victoria in difficult times, had been more than an employee. "But, sir, what did I do?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "If I made some mistake, we can talk." "There's nothing to talk about," interrupted Richard, his hands trembling as he held some papers against his chest. "I'm letting all the staff go. It's over." Ethan watched everything with wide eyes. There was something strange about the way his mother's boss was behaving. It wasn't just anger he saw on his face, but something that looked a lot like fear. The man kept looking over his shoulder, as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. "Mr. Richard, please." Margaret tried once more, her voice beginning to falter. "I need this job. My mother-in-law is in the hospital and—" "Not my problem," he cut in dryly. "Now get out of here before I call security." The humiliation was complete when Richard slammed the gate in their faces, leaving mother and son standing on the sidewalk. Margaret broke down in tears, but tried to pull herself together quickly because of Ethan. The boy, however, couldn't take his eyes off the mansion, processing every detail of what he had just witnessed. During the long journey back home, on the crowded and noisy bus, Ethan held his mother's hand and made a silent promise. He didn't know how, but he was going to find out what was going on. There was something very wrong with that situation, and he wasn't going to let his mother suffer without a fight. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The house where they lived was in Queens, on the outskirts of New York. It was a simple 2-story house that Margaret had managed to buy with great sacrifice, working as a cleaning lady in several houses simultaneously for years. On the ground floor lived Mrs. Dorothy, her 75-year-old mother-in-law, who had raised Ethan as if he were her own grandson after the boy's father abandoned them. When they got home, Margaret tried to hide what had happened, but Mrs. Dorothy immediately noticed something was wrong. The lady was lying on the living room sofa, pale and weak, but her eyes were still very sharp. "What happened, my dear?" she asked, reaching out for Margaret to sit beside her. "Nothing, mother-in-law, just a misunderstanding at work," lied Margaret, forcing a smile. "I'll sort it all out tomorrow." Ethan ran upstairs to the room he shared with his mother on the 2nd floor. He needed to think, to come up with a plan. He knew that mansion where his mother worked well, because during school vacations, when he had nowhere to stay, Mrs. Victoria always allowed him to play in the garden while Margaret did the cleaning. That's how he met Jason, the son of the gardener, Mr. Michael. Jason was 15 now and had become like an older brother to Ethan. For years, the two boys explored every corner of that property, discovering secret passages and hiding spots that even the owners themselves didn't know about. One of these passages was at the back of the mansion, where part of the wall had come loose years ago and had never been properly repaired. It was through there that Ethan and Jason usually entered and exited when they wanted to retrieve a ball that had fallen on the other side, or when they simply wanted to play adventure games. That night, while Margaret cried softly, thinking he was asleep, Ethan made a decision. The next day, as soon as his mother left to look for another job, he would return to that mansion. He needed to understand what was happening. The next morning dawned grey and cold, and Margaret put on her best clothes and left early to go door to door in the neighborhood, hoping to quickly get another job. Ethan stayed with Mrs. Dorothy, who was feeling worse and had spent the night coughing. "Grandma, I'm going to Jason's house to get some books I forgot there," Ethan lied, kissing the elderly woman's forehead. "Go quickly and come right back, boy, and be careful on the street," murmured Mrs. Dorothy, suspecting nothing. Ethan took 2 buses to reach the mansion's neighborhood. His heart was pounding when he recognized the familiar streets. He went around the block until he reached the back of the property, where the vegetation was thicker and the wall was lower. The passage was still there, hidden among the foliage. Ethan was smaller than Jason, so he easily slipped through the opening. Once inside the property, he moved carefully, using the tree cover to avoid being seen. The mansion was strangely quiet. Normally, at this time of morning, you could hear the noise of the vacuum cleaner, the washing machine, or Margaret's hurried footsteps going up and down the stairs. Today, everything was in deadly silence. Ethan approached the window of Dr. Richard Peterson's office, which was on the ground floor. What he saw left him gaping. The room, normally impeccable and organized, was completely turned upside down. Papers scattered on the floor, drawers open, some furniture out of place. But what caught his attention the most was Dr. Richard, sitting behind the desk with his head in his hands, surrounded by documents. The man seemed to have aged 10 years overnight. He was talking to himself, murmuring words that Ethan couldn't fully hear. The boy moved closer to the window, pressing his ear against the glass. He managed to catch some scattered phrases. "How could I let this happen? Victoria mustn't find out. The investors will want my head." Ethan stayed there for a few more minutes, trying to piece together the puzzle. When he was about to move away, he heard footsteps approaching. He quickly hid behind a large decorative palm tree. A woman he didn't know entered the office. She was a stern-looking lady, with graying hair pulled into a tight bun, dressed in an impeccable navy blue uniform. She had an upright posture and a gaze that seemed capable of seeing through people. "Mr. Peterson," she said in a firm voice, "I need to speak with you about my payment." Richard lifted his head, seeming annoyed by the interruption. "What payment, Mrs. Barbara? You just started working yesterday." "Exactly why?" replied the woman, crossing her arms. "We agreed on an amount for the week. It's already been 2 days of work, and I want to be paid daily, as we agreed. You'll be paid at the end of the week, like everyone else." "Everyone who?" asked Barbara, raising an eyebrow. "From what I see, you fired all the employees yesterday, including a poor woman who worked here for 15 years. Ethan felt his heart race at the mention of his mother. "That's none of your business," grumbled Richard. "You were hired to be the housekeeper and keep the house in order, not to give opinions." "I was hired, yes," agreed Barbara, "but with the promise of a salary that I now suspect doesn't exist. Do you have the money to pay me or not?" Richard stayed silent for a long moment. Ethan could see the desperation growing on his face. "Of course I have money," he finally exploded. "What do you think I am, a nobody?" "I think you're in financial trouble and trying to cheat people," said Barbara calmly. "I saw the papers scattered around, collection letters, eviction notices, foreclosure documents. You lost everything, didn't you?" The silence that followed was revealing. Richard lowered his head, defeated. "I don't know how this happened," he murmured. "They were safe investments, guaranteed. The broker said my money would triple in 6 months. And you ended up losing everything," completed Barbara, without a hint of pity in her voice. "And now you're trying to keep up appearances by firing employees to avoid paying their labor rights." Ethan got chills. So that was it. His mother's boss was bankrupt and had fired her to avoid paying what he owed. 15 years of honest work, and the man was just going to leave without giving anything in return. "How much do you owe that cleaner?" asked Barbara. "Nothing," lied Richard. "She got paid right every month." "I'm talking about vacation pay, year-end bonus, 401k, notice period," listed Barbara. 15 years on the books adds up to a considerable amount. Richard grew even paler. "It must be about $20,000 more or less," he admitted in a low voice. Ethan almost fell out of the tree where he was hiding. $20,000. That was more money than his family had ever seen together in their entire lives, and the man was just going to leave without paying anything. "And the other employees?" pressured Barbara. "Mr. Michael, the gardener, another 15,000. The cook, Mrs. Betty, about 12,000. Richard went on, as if each number were a dagger in his chest. "In total, It must be about $60,000. And you don't have that money, concluded Barbara. I don't even have a tenth of that, confessed Richard. I lost everything. The house is going to be auctioned off next month. Victoria still doesn't know anything. She thinks I'm just making some changes in the household management. Ethan was shocked. Mrs. Victoria, the kind wife who always offered him a glass of milk when she saw him playing in the garden, didn't know her husband was bankrupt. Where is your wife now? Asked Barbara. She traveled to Miami, visiting her sister. She won't be back until the end of the week, replied Richard. When she returns, I hope to have already disappeared from here. So you plan to run away and leave everyone at a loss, said Barbara, shaking her head. You're a coward, Mr. Peterson. Richard stood up abruptly, irritated. You have no right to judge me. I lost everything I built my whole life, my company, my investments, everything. And you decided to pass the loss on to those who have nothing to do with it, countered Barbara. That cleaner, for example. 15 years cleaning up your mess, taking care of your house as if it were her own, and you dismiss her like a dog? I had no choice. There's always a choice. You could have talked to her, explained the situation, negotiated an installment plan, but you preferred to humiliate her in front of her own son. Ethan felt tears welling up in his eyes as he remembered the scene from the day before. His mother didn't deserve that. What do you want from me? Asked Richard, exasperated. My payment, said Barbara simply. And I hope you do the right thing by these employees. I already told you I don't have the money. Then sell something. I see many expensive things in this house. Paintings, jewelry, cars. Your wife won't miss one or two pieces. Richard looked at her as if she were crazy. Are you suggesting I sell Victoria's things without her knowing? I'm suggesting you take responsibility for your actions, said Barbara firmly, but I see that's beyond your capabilities. She headed for the door, but stopped before leaving. I'll give you until Friday to resolve my situation. If I don't receive my payment, I'll find that cleaning lady and tell her everything I heard here today. I'm sure she'll be very interested to learn about the $20,000 you owe her. After Barbara left, Richard remained alone in the office, looking completely defeated. Ethan waited a few minutes before moving. He needed to process everything he had discovered, but also needed evidence. Carefully, the boy circled the house to the back entrance, which he knew always remained unlocked for Mr. Michael to bring in the gardening equipment. Luckily for him, the door was still open. Ethan entered the house he knew like the back of his hand. He took the secondary stairs leading upstairs, avoiding the area where Richard was. He needed to reach the office unseen to gather some evidence of what he had discovered. He waited patiently until he heard Richard go up to the bedroom, probably to rest or hide from his problems. Then he silently went down and entered the office. What he saw shocked him even more. Besides the papers scattered on the floor, there were documents on the desk that confirmed everything he had heard. Collection letters, foreclosure notices, legal notifications, and in the midst of it all, a folder labeled Employees, Severance Pay. Ethan opened the folder with trembling hands. Everything was itemized. His mother's name, length of service, amount due. $23,000 to be exact. There was also information about Mr. Michael, Mrs. Betty, and other employees who had been fired without receiving anything. The boy took out his old cell phone, a simple model his mother had bought used so he could communicate in emergencies. He began photographing all the important documents, trying to be quick and quiet. That's when he heard footsteps coming down the stairs. Richard was returning. Ethan looked around desperately, searching for a hiding place. The only option was to hide behind the large curtain covering one of the windows. Richard entered the office talking on the phone, apparently trying to convince someone to lend him money. Please, Tyler, it's just until I can sell the house, he said in a pleading voice. $500,000 isn't much for you. In 6 months, I'll pay you back with interest. Ethan could only hear one side of the conversation, but from Richard's face it wasn't going well. What do you mean you can't? We've been partners for 10 years. His voice rose in tone. You lost money in that investment too, I know, but... A long pause. Okay, I understand. Thanks anyway. Richard hung up forcefully, cursing under his breath. Ethan stayed hidden there for another 20 minutes, watching Richard make call after call, always with the same result. No one wanted to lend him money. The situation was worse than he had imagined. Finally, Richard left the office again. Ethan waited a few more minutes before coming out of hiding. He had all the evidence he needed, but now he had to decide what to do with it. As he was leaving the house, he heard a voice behind him. "And you, what are you doing here?" Ethan turned and saw Barbara standing at the door, looking at him with curiosity, but without hostility. I, Ethan stammered, not knowing what to say. "You're the son of the cleaning lady who got fired yesterday, aren't you?" asked Barbara, approaching. Ethan nodded, still shaken from being discovered. "I saw you two yesterday when that disgusting man humiliated your mother," said Barbara, her voice softening. "How did you get in here?" "Through a passage in the back," confessed Ethan. "I used to play here when my mum worked. I knew the place." "And what did you come to do?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, then decided to trust her. "I wanted to find out why he fired my mom out of the blue. My grandma is sick, we need that money." Barbara looked at the boy with an expression mixing admiration and concern. "And did you find anything?" "I found out he owes $23,000 to my mom," said Ethan, showing the photos on his phone, "and that he's broke, and that his wife doesn't know anything." Barbara took the phone and examined the photos carefully. "My God," she murmured. "This man is worse than I imagined. Are you going to report me?" asked Ethan, afraid. "Report you?" Barbara laughed bitterly. "Kid, you did what I should have done. You got the evidence of this scoundrel's crimes." She returned the phone to Ethan and knelt to his level. "I'm going to make a deal with you. I'll help you get the money your mom is owed, but you have to promise me one thing." "What?" "That we'll do this the right way, getting legal help. No taking matters into our own hands, okay?" Ethan nodded vigorously. "Great. Now tell me everything you heard and saw here today." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. When Ethan got home that afternoon, he found Margaret sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by newspaper classifieds, with an expression of deep discouragement. Mrs. Dorothy was sleeping on the couch, her breathing heavy and irregular. "Where were you, Ethan?" asked Margaret without looking up from the newspapers. "Playing at Jason's house," lied Ethan, feeling bad about not being able to tell the truth yet. "Did you get anything, Mom?" Margaret shook her head no. "Everyone wants a reference from the previous house, and when I say I worked for Dr. Richard Peterson, they say they'll call him. But I don't have the courage to ask him after the way he treated me." Ethan felt his heart tighten, seeing his mother's suffering. He wanted to tell her everything he had discovered, show her the evidence, give her hope. But he had promised Barbara they would do things the right way. "Mom, he has an obligation to give you a reference. You worked there 15 years, you were always a good employee." "I know, son, but after yesterday, I think he's mad at me for something I don't know about. Or maybe he's got problems and takes it out on everyone," suggested Ethan, testing the waters. Margaret looked at her son curiously. "What kind of problems?" "I don't know, Mom, but people who yell at others for no reason are usually going through difficulties." It was a sharp observation for a 10-year-old, and Margaret was impressed with her son's maturity. "Maybe, Ethan. But that doesn't change our situation. I need to find work urgently or we won't be able to pay this month's bills." That night, after Margaret went to sleep, Ethan lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling and planning the next steps. Barbara had said she would contact him the next day, but how? He hadn't given her any phone number. The answer came the next morning when someone knocked on the house door. Margaret went to answer and found an elegant, well-dressed lady who smiled kindly. "Good morning. Are you Margaret Johnson?" "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" "My name is Barbara Williams. I work as a housekeeper for Dr. Richard Peterson. I'd like to talk to you about your dismissal." Margaret Johnson turned pale. "Did he send you here for what? To humiliate me even more?" "Quite the opposite," said Barbara calmly. "I came here on my own because I think you were unfairly wronged." Ethan appeared at the door, pretending curiosity. "May I come in?" asked Barbara. "I have some important things to tell." Margaret hesitated, but ended up inviting Barbara to come in. They sat in the small living room, where Mrs. Dorothy was sound asleep. "First of all," Barbara began. "I want you to know that Dr. Richard is facing serious financial difficulties. He lost everything in bad investments and is about to lose the house." Margaret was stunned. "What do you mean he lost everything?" "He put his money into investments that promised fantastic returns and ended up being scammed. The house is going to be auctioned off next month." "But then, he really didn't have the money to pay me." "That's the thing," said Barbara, looking meaningfully at Ethan. "He does have money. It might not be in cash, but he has valuable assets that can be sold to settle the employment debts." "I don't understand," said Margaret, confused. Barbara took a deep breath before continuing. "Margaret, you know you have employment rights to receive, right? 15 years on the books add up to a considerable amount." "I know I'm entitled to some things, but I never calculated how much," admitted Margaret. "It's $23,000, said Barbara directly. Margaret almost fainted. $23,000? It can't be. "Accrued and proportional vacation pay, 13th salary, 401k, paid notice," listed Barbara. "All correct. Calculated based on length of service." Ethan pretended to be surprised, but inside he was relieved that Barbara was keeping their agreement. "And how do you know this?" asked Margaret, still in shock. "Because I saw the documents at the house. Dr. Richard had everything calculated. He knew exactly how much he owed each employee. So he fired me knowing he owed me this money and wasn't going to pay." "Exactly," confirmed Barbara. "And he did the same with the other employees. In total, he owes almost $70,000 in severance payments." Margaret started to cry, mixing anger and sadness. "How could he do this? I always respected him, worked with dedication. I never even stole a roll of toilet paper from that house." "Because he's a coward," said Barbara bluntly. "He preferred to pass the loss from his mistakes on to you, who have nothing to do with it." "But if he doesn't have the money, how am I going to get what he owes me?" "That's just it," said Barbara, smiling for the first time. "He may not have cash, but that house is full of valuable items, paintings, jewelry, expensive cars, more than enough to pay what he owes." "But how can I force him to sell those things?" "By seeking your rights in court," said Barbara. "With the right evidence, a labor attorney can get his assets frozen until he settles the debt." Margaret was silent for a long moment, processing everything she had heard. "And what evidence is that?" Barbara looked at Ethan, who understood the signal. "Mom," said the boy hesitantly, "I have something to tell you." And then Ethan told everything. The secret passage, the discovery about Richard's financial situation, the documents he had photographed, the meeting with Barbara. Margaret listened with her mouth open, alternating between pride in her son's courage and worry about the risks he had taken. "Ethan, how could you do such a thing? Something could have happened to you." "I wasn't going to let him humiliate you like that, Mom," said Ethan firmly. "You've worked your whole life honestly. You deserve to get what's yours." "Your son is a brave and smart boy," said Barbara. "Without him, you would never have known the truth." Margaret looked at the photos on Ethan's phone, seeing the evidence of the severance pay calculations. "Even with this proof, I don't know if I can face a legal battle," she said uncertainly. "Lawyers are expensive. Lawsuits take years." "Not necessarily," said Barbara. "I know a very good labor attorney who sometimes takes cases like this without charging anything up front. He only gets a percentage when he secures the money. And would he agree to take my case? With this evidence, I'm sure he would. It's a winning case." At that moment, Mrs. Dorothy woke up with a violent coughing fit. Margaret rushed to help her, but the elderly woman was visibly worse. "My dear," said Mrs. Dorothy with difficulty, "I think I need to go to the hospital." Margaret looked at Ethan and then at Barbara, panic clear in her eyes. "I don't have money for a private hospital, and through Medicare, it will take hours to get care." "How much would private care cost?" asked Barbara. "About 500 rays plus tests," calculated Margaret. "Money I don't have." Barbara opened her purse and took out a 500 rays bill. "Here, take your mother-in-law to get care now." "I can't accept," protested Margaret. "Yes, you can. Consider it an advance on the $23,000 you'll receive," said Barbara with a smile. As they took Mrs. Dorothy to the hospital, Barbara explained her plan to Ethan. "Tomorrow I'll go see Attorney Daniel, the lawyer I mentioned. I'll show him the evidence and see if he takes the case. If he does, we'll file a labor lawsuit against Richard." "And what if he tries to run away before?" one asked Ethan. "That's the problem," admitted Barbara. "He could disappear with everything before the lawsuit goes through. That's why we need to act fast. Is there anything we can do to stop him from fleeing?" Barbara thought for a moment. "Actually, yes. If we can get in touch with his wife, Mrs. Victoria, before she returns from her trip, we can tell her everything. She's a fair woman. I'm sure she won't allow her husband to run off, leaving you in the lurch." "But how are we going to talk to her?" "Leave that to me. I know she's at her sister's house in Miami. I'll find a way to contact her." At the hospital, Mrs. Dorothy was diagnosed with mild pneumonia, but it needed immediate treatment. The doctor prescribed expensive antibiotics and recommended complete rest. "At least it's nothing serious," said Margaret, relieved but worried about the cost of the medicines. "The medicines are on me too," said Barbara. "Consider it another advance." "Why are you doing all this for us?" asked Margaret, moved. Barbara was silent for a few seconds before answering. "Because I was also cheated by unscrupulous employers. I worked for 20 years for a family that promised me a pension in my old age. When the time came, they fired me without me getting anything. I know what it's like to be humiliated after years of honest work." Ethan understood that there was much more behind Barbara's help than she was revealing. The next morning, while Margaret was taking care of Mrs. Dorothy, Barbara showed up at the house with news. "I spoke with Attorney Daniel. He wants to talk to you this afternoon." "Is he going to take the case?" asked Margaret anxiously. "He said that with this evidence it's practically impossible to lose, but he wants to talk in person before committing." In the afternoon, Margaret, Ethan, and Barbara went to the lawyer's office, which was in downtown New York. Attorney Daniel was a 50-year-old man, short and chubby, but with intelligent eyes and a welcoming smile. He analyzed all the photos Ethan had taken, asked several questions about Margaret's length of service and her duties in the house. "The case is clear-cut," he said finally. "With this evidence, I can guarantee you'll get everything you're entitled to." "And how long does it take?" asked Margaret. "Normally, labor lawsuits take from 6 months to 2 years, explained Daniel. "But in this specific case, I can try for an emergency injunction to freeze the debtor's assets, since there's a risk he might dispose of the property." "Does that mean he won't be able to sell anything until he pays what he owes?" asked Ethan. "Exactly. I'll ask the court to freeze all his assets. House, cars, bank accounts, everything." "And what if he's already fled?" worried Margaret. "We'll find that out tomorrow. I'll prepare the documents tonight and file the lawsuit first thing in the morning." When they left the office, Margaret was visibly more upbeat for the first time in days. "Do you really think it'll work?" she asked Barbara. "It will work," assured Barbara. "Now it's just a matter of time." But time was exactly what they didn't have. The next morning, when Barbara arrived at the mansion to work, she found unusual activity. There was a moving truck parked in front of the house and men were loading furniture and objects. Richard appeared supervising the operation, visibly nervous. When he saw Barbara, he tried to act natural. "Good morning, Barbara. We're just reorganizing some things." "Reorganizing to where?" asked Barbara suspiciously. "To a storage unit. Victoria wants to redecorate when she returns." Barbara didn't believe a word, but pretended she did. "I see. And when is she coming back again?" "Tomorrow," lied Richard. Actually, Victoria wouldn't be back until the end of the week, and he planned to be far away by then. During the day, Barbara discreetly observed as Richard oversaw the removal of various valuable items from the house. Expensive paintings, some jewelry he had taken from Victoria's safe, even her car was being loaded onto a tow truck. It was obvious he was preparing to flee, taking everything he could. Barbara urgently needed to warn Margaret and the attorney. During lunch break, Barbara left the house and called Attorney Daniel. "Attorney, it's urgent. Richard Peterson is taking everything from the house. I think he's going to flee today." "Damn!" exclaimed Daniel. "The lawsuit will only be filed tomorrow. I can't request the asset freeze yet." "What now? Are we going to lose everything?" "Let me think. Is there any way to hold him off until tomorrow?" "I don't know. He's very nervous. Anything could make him speed up his plans. Listen, I'll try to file the lawsuit today even after regular hours. Maybe I can get an emergency injunction still today. And if you can't, then we'll have to hope he doesn't disappear with everything before tomorrow. Barbara hung up the phone and returned to the house, trying to act normally, but Richard was getting increasingly agitated, constantly talking on the phone and giving contradictory orders to the movers. Around 4 in the afternoon, Barbara overheard Richard talking to someone about being at the bus station at 8 tonight. It was now or never. She discreetly left the house and went straight to Margaret's house. She needed to tell everything and decide what to do. "He's fleeing tonight," she announced as soon as she arrived. Margaret was desperate. "What now? Are we really going to lose everything?" "Not yet," said Ethan firmly. "We have to do something." "What can a 10-year-old boy do against a grown man?" asked Margaret, exasperated. "We can tell Mrs. Victoria," suggested Ethan. "But she only returns tomorrow," reminded Barbara. "Then let's call her today," insisted Ethan. "We don't know her phone number," said Margaret. "I know where to get it," said Ethan mysteriously. "Where?" "At the house. There's an address book in the kitchen with all the important numbers. Mrs. Victoria always used it when she needed to call someone." Barbara and Margaret Johnson exchanged glances. "Ethan, it's too risky for you to go back in there," said Margaret. "But it's our only chance," argued Ethan. "If he runs away today, we'll never see our money again." After much debate, they decided to try. Barbara would return to the house and distract Richard, while Ethan would enter through the secret passage to get Mrs. Victoria's phone number. The plan was risky, but it was the only option they had. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. At 6 in the evening, Ethan was hidden in the back of the mansion, waiting for Barbara's signal. The plan was simple. She would call Richard to the second floor with some excuse, and Ethan would enter through the kitchen to get the address book with the phone numbers. The signal was Barbara shouting from upstairs, "Mr. Richard, there's a problem in the main bathroom. The water is leaking badly." Ethan heard hurried footsteps going up the stairs. It was his chance. He quickly entered through the back door and ran to the kitchen. The address book was exactly where he remembered, hanging on the wall next to the phone. He quickly flipped through it until he found Victoria, Miami, sister's house, and wrote down the number on his phone. He was leaving when he heard voices coming from the stairs. Richard and Barbara were coming down, he complaining that there was no leak. "I'm sure it was leaking," insisted Barbara, trying to buy time. Ethan hid behind the kitchen door, praying not to be discovered. The footsteps passed by the kitchen toward the living room, and he took the opportunity to leave through the back again. 20 minutes later, he was back home with the phone number. "I got it," he announced, showing the written number. "Now who's going to call?" asked Barbara. "I will," said Ethan, determined. "Ethan, no," protested Margaret. "She doesn't know you. She won't believe you." "Then you call, Mom." "I can't," said Margaret, nervous. "I've never spoken to her personally. I only greeted her when I saw her." "I'll call," decided Barbara. "I've talked to her a few times." Barbara dialed the number with trembling hands. After a few rings, a woman's voice answered. "Hello? Mrs. Victoria. This is Barbara, the new housekeeper of your house." "Oh, hi, Barbara. Did something happen?" "Ma'am, I need to speak urgently with you about your husband." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What happened with Richard?" "He is, how can I say, going through serious financial difficulties and making some decisions that you should know about." "What kind of difficulties?" Barbara took a deep breath before continuing. "Mrs. Victoria, your husband lost everything in bad investments. The house is going to be auctioned, and he fired all the employees without paying their severance." The silence on the other end was deafening. "What do you mean, lost everything?" Victoria's voice was changing tone. "He invested the money in investments that promised high returns and was deceived, and now he's taking valuable objects from the house to run away before you return." "This can't be true," said Victoria, but her voice showed that she was already starting to believe. "Ma'am, I can prove everything I'm saying. I have documents, photos." "What kind of documents?" "Collection letters, foreclosure notices, calculations of the employee's severance pay. Everything he tried to hide from you. Victoria was silent for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was different, colder. "Barbara, I want you to record everything, all conversations, all his movements. I'm returning to New York right now." "What time will you arrive, ma'am?" "I'm leaving here in an hour. I'll arrive there around 10 at night. And Barbara." "Yes, ma'am?" "Don't let him leave the house. Make up any excuse, but don't let him." "How will I do that?" "Use your creativity. But if he leaves this house today, he'll have to explain himself to me tomorrow." Victoria hung up and Barbara stared at the phone with a mix of relief and worry. "Now what?" asked Margaret. "Now we have to stop him from running away before Mrs. Victoria arrives," said Barbara. "How?" "I don't know yet, but I'll figure something out." Barbara returned to the mansion at 7 in the evening. Richard was clearly getting ready to leave. There were suitcases by the entrance, and he was wearing travel clothes. "Barbara, you can leave early today," he said, avoiding eye contact. "Actually, sir, I need to talk about my payment before I go." Richard sighed impatiently. "We already discussed this yesterday. I know we did, but today is my last day. The lady who referred me for this job will call me tonight, and I need to give her an update." "Which lady?" "The owner of the domestic employment agency," Barbara made up. "She wants to know how my experience here was." Richard grew nervous at the prospect of a call from the agency. "Look, Barbara, the truth is, I'm going through some temporary difficulties." "What kind of difficulties?" "Financial ones, but it's only temporary. I'll sort everything out in a few days." "I see. And when do you plan to pay me?" "Next week at the latest. The problem is, I need the money today. I have bills to pay tomorrow morning." Richard glanced at his watch. It was 7:30. He wanted to be at the bus station by 8 to catch the 8:15 bus. "Barbara, I can't pay you today. I don't have cash at home." "But can't you go to the bank? It's still open." I don't have money in my account either." Barbara pretended to be outraged. "What do you mean, no money? You live in a mansion, have expensive cars, and can't pay $300 to an employee. I already explained it's temporary." "Temporary nothing. You're giving me the runaround. I'm calling the agency right now to tell them you're skipping out on paying employees." Richard panicked. The last thing he needed was someone making a scene. "Wait, Barbara, let's talk calmly." "There's nothing to talk about. Either you pay me now, or I'll make a scene the whole neighborhood will hear." To give credibility to her threat, Barbara picked up the kitchen phone and started dialing any number. "Hello, agency. This is Barbara. I want to file a complaint about client Richard Peterson." "Hang up that phone," Richard yelled, snatching the receiver from her hands. "Then pay me." Richard looked at his watch again. 7:40. If he missed the 8:15 bus, the next one wouldn't leave until early morning. All right, I'll figure something out." He ran to the office and came back with a small piece of jewelry he had taken from Victoria's safe. "Take this. It's worth way more than $300. Tomorrow you sell it and keep the change." Barbara looked at the jewelry, a ring with a stone that looked precious. "This isn't mine. It's your wife's. She won't miss it. She has many others like it." "I won't accept stolen jewelry." "It's not theft. I'm married to her." "Yes, it is theft. You're taking her things without her knowing to pay your debts." Richard was growing desperate. It was 7:45. "Barbara, for God's sake, take the jewelry or don't, but let me leave." "I'll only accept cash." $300 in cash." "I don't have $300 in cash." "Then go get it. The bank is still open for 15 more minutes. My account is frozen." The confession slipped out before he could think. Barbara pretended to be surprised. "Frozen? Why?" Richard realized he had said too much. For technical issues. I'll fix it tomorrow." "Technical issues don't freeze accounts, Mr. Richard. Accounts only get frozen for debt or by court order." At that moment, they heard the sound of a car pulling into the garage. Richard turned pale. "Who is it?" he whispered. Barbara smiled inwardly. Victoria had arrived earlier than expected. "I don't know. Maybe it's your wife." "She's not coming back until Friday," said Richard in total panic. "Then it must be someone else," said Barbara, heading for the door. "I'll see who it is." Victoria came through the front door like a hurricane. She was visibly upset, her hair messy from the rushed trip, and her eyes shining with anger. "Richard!" she shouted as soon as she saw her husband. "We need to talk. Now." Richard tried to act natural, but he was visibly nervous. "Victoria, what a surprise. I thought you weren't coming back until Friday." "I changed my plans," she said dryly. "Barbara, thank you for calling me." Richard looked from Victoria to Barbara, starting to understand what had happened. "Called? About what?" "About your financial situation, Richard. About the employees you fired without paying. About the investments you lost without telling me anything." Richard was speechless for a few seconds. "Victoria, I can explain everything." "Oh, you can explain. And you will. But first," she looked around, noticing the suitcases by the entrance. "Where were you going with these suitcases?" A business trip. With personal suitcases, with the car loaded with our things." Victoria had seen the activity in the garage and noticed that several things from the house were missing. "Richard, were you running away?" His silence was more telling than any answer. "My God," murmured Victoria, sinking into an armchair. "It's really true. You lost everything and were running away, leaving me to deal with the situation alone." "Victoria, it's not like that." "Not like what?" she exploded. "Barbara told me everything. The investments, the debts, the house that's going to be auctioned. Everything you hid from me." Richard tried one last move. "She's lying. Don't believe a maid you don't even know." "A maid you hired yourself," Victoria shot back. "And who had the decency to warn me before you ran off with everything you could carry?" At that moment, Victoria noticed the ring on Barbara's hand. "What ring is that?" Barbara explained what had happened, how Richard tried to pay her with Victoria's jewelry. "So," said Victoria, her voice growing colder, "besides hiding the debts, besides firing employees without paying, you were also stealing my jewelry to run away." "It's not stealing. We're married. Marriage doesn't give you the right to take my things without me knowing to pay your debts." Victoria stood up and began walking around the room, observing the empty spaces where furniture and objects used to be. "Where are my paintings? Where is the sound system? Where is my car?" "Victoria, we needed money urgently." "We needed?" Victoria laughed bitterly. "You needed, Richard. I didn't even know there was a problem. I was going to tell you everything after I fixed it." "After you ran away, you mean?" Richard fell silent, defeated. There was no more denying or hiding it. Victoria turned to Barbara. "You said you have proof of everything?" "Yes, ma'am. Documents, photos, recordings." "Recordings?" "Of phone conversations he had today, trying to borrow money." Victoria looked at her husband with a mix of disgust and disappointment. 25 years of marriage, Richard. 25 years building a life together, and you decide to destroy it all by yourself, without even giving me a chance to help. Victoria, I didn't want to worry you. You didn't want to worry me. You preferred to leave me in the dark, while you planned to run away and leave me alone to deal with the consequences. Victoria headed for the phone. "What are you going to do?" asked Richard, alarmed. "I'm calling my attorney. I need to know exactly what our legal situation is." "Victoria, don't do this. We can work this out between us." "Work out what?" "You already took matters into your own hands when you decided to hide everything from me." While Victoria was on the phone with the attorney, Barbara took the opportunity to approach Richard. "You have two options now," she said quietly. "Either cooperate to resolve the employee's situation or face the legal consequences." "What consequences?" "Your wife has her own money, doesn't she? Family inheritance, separate investments?" Richard nodded reluctantly. "Then she can choose to help you or let you fend for yourself. And from what I see, your attitude isn't encouraging the first option." When Victoria ended the call, her face was even more serious. "Attorney William is coming here now," she announced. "We're going to do a complete review of our financial and asset situation." "Victoria, that's not necessary." "It is necessary, because apparently I can't trust you to tell me the truth." She turned to Barbara. "Can you stay? I want you to tell everything to my attorney when he arrives." "Of course, ma'am." "And that employee who was fired, Margaret? Do you have her contact?" Yes, I do. Call her. I want to speak in person. An hour later, the mansion's living room was full. Victoria, Richard, Barbara, attorney William, Victoria's lawyer, Margaret, Ethan, and even attorney Daniel, the labor lawyer, were present. Victoria had insisted on hearing everyone's version before making any decisions. First, she said, taking control of the situation, I want to apologize to you, Margaret, for the way you were treated. 15 years of honest work don't deserve that humiliation. Margaret was visibly uncomfortable being in that situation, but thanked Victoria for her words. Secondly, Victoria continued, I want you all to know that I won't allow my husband's irresponsible behavior to harm innocent people. She turned to Attorney Daniel. Attorney, what exactly is the amount my husband owes the laid-off employees? From what I've calculated, about $68,000 in total, replied Daniel, showing the papers. Victoria didn't even blink at the amount. And if this amount is paid in full, does that resolve the employee's legal situation? Completely. With interest and adjustments, of course. Victoria turned to her own lawyer. William, can I pay this amount without compromising my financial situation? Yes, Victoria. You have enough investments to cover this amount without any problems. Great, said Victoria, turning to Richard. Now you, my dear husband, are going to explain to me exactly how we got into this situation. And that's how the whole truth finally came out. Richard told them about the extravagant investments a broker had offered, promising to triple the money in 6 months. He told how he had invested not only his personal savings, but also company money, hoping to return everything with profit before anyone noticed. How much money did you lose in total? Asked Victoria. $300,000, confessed Richard, hanging his head. Victoria was silent for a long moment. $300,000, she repeated slowly. How much is our house worth, William? About $800,000, replied the lawyer. And my personal investments? Approximately $500,000. Victoria did the math in her head. So, even losing $300,000, we still have enough assets to start over. You didn't need to hide anything. You didn't need to fire the employees without paying. And you certainly didn't need to try to run away. Victoria, I didn't want to disappoint you. You didn't want to disappoint me? Victoria laughed bitterly. Richard, the only thing that disappoints me is your cowardice. If you had come to talk to me when it happened, we would have solved everything together. Now, besides the financial loss, I still have to deal with the moral shame. She stood up and went to Margaret. Margaret, how long do you need to find another job? I don't know, Mum. I was looking, but without a reference from the previous household, it's difficult. You won't need to look. I'm offering your job back if you want it, with a raise. Margaret was speechless. Ma'am, I accept, of course, but are you sure? I am. You've always been an exemplary employee. The mistake was entirely my husband's. She turned to Ethan. And you, brave young man, deserve special recognition for your determination in defending your mother. Ethan turned red, not knowing what to say. I'm thinking of paying for your studies at a private school. What do you think? Ethan looked at his mother, who nodded emotionally. Thank you very much, ma'am. And you, Barbara, said Victoria, addressing the housekeeper, not only will you receive your payment on time, but I'll offer a permanent contract, if you're interested. It would be an honor to work for you, Barbara replied sincerely. Finally, Victoria turned to her husband. And you, Richard, will spend the next few months repairing the damage you've done. You'll work to return every last cent you lost. How? You'll look for a job, like any normal person. And you'll hand over your entire salary to the family until the debt is paid off. Victoria, I'm 50 years old. Who's going to give me a job? That's your problem. You should have thought of that before betting our money on shady schemes. Attorney William intervened. Victoria, we need to formalize some legal agreements to protect your personal assets. What kind of agreements? Separation of assets, at least temporarily. If Richard has other debts we don't know about, they can't compromise your investments. Victoria agreed immediately. Perfect. Draw up the papers. Richard tried to protest, but Victoria was unyielding. You lost the right to have a say in our finances when you decided to hide everything from me." In the weeks that followed, life in the mansion gradually returned to normal. Margaret resumed her work, this time with a salary 20% higher than before. Barbara settled in as the official housekeeper, bringing order and efficiency to the home. Ethan began studying at a private school in the neighborhood, where he quickly stood out for his intelligence and determination. Mrs. Dorothy recovered completely from pneumonia and returned to taking care of the house with her characteristic humor. Richard, after weeks of searching, got a job as a salesperson in a furniture store. The salary was much lower than he was used to, but Victoria was inflexible. Everything went to pay off the family debt. The labor lawsuit filed by attorney Daniel was dismissed after Victoria voluntarily paid all the severance fees for the dismissed employees. Mr. Michael and Mrs. Betty were also rehired and received their rights on time. But the real change happened in personal relationships. Victoria discovered she had a strength and independence she didn't know she possessed. She took full control of the family finances and began investing in her own businesses. "You know something, Margaret?" she said one afternoon while having coffee in the kitchen. "This whole crisis was the best thing that happened to me in years." "How so, Mum?" "I found out I don't need to depend on him for anything. For 25 years I let him make all the financial decisions, thinking he understood more than I did. Now I know I can manage just fine on my own." Margaret smiled. "You've always been very smart. You just needed an opportunity to show it." "And you, Margaret? How do you feel working here again?" "Different," Margaret confessed. "Before I felt like just an employee. Now I feel like part of the family." And it was true. Victoria treated all employees with genuine respect and consideration. She made a point of knowing their personal lives, helped with problems, and always remembered important dates. Ethan, in turn, thrived at his new school. Not just because of the better teaching conditions, but because he was finally in an environment where his intelligence was valued. He quickly made friends and became one of the top students in his class. "Mum," he said one evening while they were doing homework together, "I think I want to be a lawyer when I grow up." "Why, son?" "To help people like us, hard-working people who get cheated by dishonest bosses." Margaret felt her chest swell with pride. "You'll be a great lawyer, Ethan. You've already shown you have the courage to fight for what's right." 6 months after the whole mess began, Victoria made a decision that surprised everyone. "Richard," she said during a tense dinner, "I want a separation." Richard nearly choked on his food. "Victoria, why? I'm paying everything I owe, working honestly." "It's not about the money," Victoria explained calmly. "It's about trust. You broke something that can't be fixed." "But Victoria, we've been married for 25 years. "Exactly. 25 years when I thought I knew you. And I discovered I was married to a stranger capable of lying, hiding, and running away when things got tough. I've changed. I'm working, taking responsibility. You only changed because you were forced to. If I hadn't discovered everything, you would have run away and left me alone with the debts." Victoria was right, and Richard knew it. "What's going to happen to me?" "You'll continue paying what you owe until it's all settled. After that, you can live your life as you wish." "And the house? It stays with me. It was bought with money from my inheritance anyway." "Victoria, please, give me a chance. I gave you 25 years of chances. Now I want to live my life with people I can trust." The separation was handled civilly. Richard continued living in a small apartment near work, dedicating his entire salary to paying off the family debt. Victoria remained in the mansion, which now felt lighter and more cheerful. A year later, Ethan was in second grade at one of the best private schools in the area. His grades were excellent, and he was already talking about his dream of studying law. Margaret had become more than an employee. She was a friend and advisor to Victoria. Together they managed the house and still found time to take courses and do activities they had always wanted. Barbara established herself as the most efficient housekeeper the home had ever had. Her experience and wisdom were valued by everyone, and she became a maternal figure to both Ethan and the other employees. Mrs. Dorothy, fully recovered, returned to being the cheerful and wise matriarch of the Johnson family. She loved visiting the mansion and talking with Victoria about life and the social changes they had witnessed over the years. "You know, Margaret," Mrs. Dorothy said one afternoon while they were having tea in the mansion's garden, "this whole story reminded me why I've always preferred women over men for friendship." "Why, mother-in-law?" "Because when a woman decides to help you, she really helps. She doesn't make excuses or run away at the first difficulty." Victoria, who overheard the comment, laughed. "Mrs. Dorothy is right. We women know the value of solidarity." "It's true," agreed Barbara, joining the conversation. "Men like to compete with each other. Women prefer to support one another." Ethan came running into the garden, coming from school with news. "Mom, Grandma, Mrs. Victoria, Barbara," he shouted, out of breath. "What is it, son?" asked Margaret, concerned. "I won the school essay contest." All the women stood up to hug him, each prouder than the next. "What essay, Ethan?" asked Victoria. "It was about social justice. I wrote about our story, about how hard-working people deserve to be respected and valued." "And what was the prize?" Barbara wanted to know. "A scholarship for a college prep course. When I get to high school, I'll be able to take it." Mrs. Dorothy wiped away a tear of emotion. "My grandson is really going to be a doctor," she murmured. "He's going to be a doctor and defend workers like us," said Margaret, hugging her son. "Not like us," corrected Victoria, "because you're not just workers anymore, you're part of our family." And that was exactly how everyone felt. The mansion, which had once been just a workplace for Margaret, had turned into a real home for everyone living there. 2 years later, Richard finally paid off the entire family debt. Victoria kept her word and allowed him to go on with his life, but he was practically a stranger to everyone in the house. Ethan, now 12, remained the family's pride. His grades were consistently high, and he had developed a special passion for history and literature, while still holding on to his dream of studying law. "Mrs. Victoria," he said one evening as she was helping him with a school assignment, "can I ask a personal question?" "Of course, Ethan. Do you regret separating from Mr. Richard?" Victoria was thoughtful for a moment. "You know, Ethan, at first I thought I did. 25 years of marriage aren't easy to forget. But now, looking back, I realize these have been the best 2 years of my life." "Why?" "Because I learned that I can be happy on my own, that I don't need to depend on anyone to have a full and meaningful life." "And don't you miss having a partner?" "I have you all," said Victoria, smiling. "I have your mother, who is a true friend. I have Barbara, who is wise and trustworthy. I have your grandmother, who is fun and teaches me new things every day. And I have you, who reminds me of the importance of fighting for what's right." Ethan smiled. "We really like you too." "I know. And that's worth more than any marriage based on lies." In fact, the household dynamic had become something unique and special. Victoria discovered she enjoyed having a home full of life and interesting conversations. Margaret found stability and respect she had never imagined possible. Barbara finally had a place where her experience and wisdom were valued. And Ethan grew up surrounded by strong, independent female role models, learning early on the value of honesty, justice, and solidarity. 3 years after the whole story began, Ethan was about to enter high school. The scholarship he had won in the essay contest had prepared him well for the academic challenges ahead. "Mom," he said one Sunday morning while the whole family was gathered in the garden, "I've decided I'm going to study to get into a public university." "That's great, son. But you don't need to worry about college money. Mrs. Victoria already said she'll help." "I know, and I'm very grateful, but I want to achieve it on my own merit. I want to prove that a boy from the outskirts can get wherever he wants with education and determination." Victoria smiled proudly. "Ethan, you've already proven that, but I understand your point. It's important to achieve things on our own." "Exactly. And when I graduate from law school, I'm going to open a practice specializing in labor rights. I want to help people like us, who sometimes get taken advantage of by dishonest employers." "You'll be a wonderful lawyer," said Barbara. "You've already shown you have the courage and determination to fight for justice." "And you'll have the support of all of us," added Mrs. Dorothy. "Women united are an unstoppable force." "That's true," agreed Margaret. "Just look at what we've achieved when we support each other." Victoria looked around, seeing all those strong and determined women. and the brave boy growing up inspired by them. "You know what?" she said. "That terrible day when Richard fired Margaret without explanation was the best day of my life." "How so?" asked Margaret, surprised. "Because that's when I discovered what I'm capable of. That's when I truly met all of you. That's when our real family began." Ethan stood up and hugged Victoria. "Thank you for believing in us." "Thank you for teaching me what a real family is," replied Victoria, moved. And there, in that sunny garden, surrounded by strong women and full of dreams about the future, Ethan knew he had learned life's most important lessons: that justice is always worth fighting for, that honesty is the most precious asset one can have, and that the best families are those we choose and build with love and mutual respect. Years later, when Ethan Peterson Johnson graduated from law school and opened his practice specializing in labor rights, he would hang a photo from that day in the garden on his wall. A photo of his real family, his mother Margaret, his grandmother Dorothy, his godmother Victoria, and his aunt Barbara. And whenever a client came to his office feeling humiliated and wronged, Ethan would remember that 10-year-old boy who hid behind a curtain to defend his mother, and he would know exactly how to help. End of story. And you, what did you think of this story of overcoming injustice? Tell us in the comments if you were moved by little Ethan's determination and the unity of these strong women. Your like and subscription to the channel motivate us to keep bringing stories that touch the heart.